Hello, my friends. Subscribe and like.
Tried to escape to change our future. But when I spoke up, my man hurt me. For hours until I was broken. Then his former spouse who hated me admitted he'd done it all to her before. When Emily, 31F, met David, 42M, things moved at lightning speed. She had just ended a chapter in her life and was craving something new, stability, love, maybe even a future family. David, a divorced father of two boys aged 8 and 10 at the time, seemed like someone who had his life figured out. So, when he invited her to move and not long after they started dating, she said yes, eager for a fresh start. At first, it felt exciting. A blended life, a new home, the thrill of falling in love. But as time passed, the shine faded. The routine took over. She went to work, took care of the kids, helped around the house, and tried to keep everything running smoothly. The relationship wasn't growing, it was surviving. And deep down, Emily started to feel like she had skipped a step, like she'd built a life before making sure it was the one she actually wanted. For the last several years, Emily had been the backbone of the household. She worked a steady 9 to 6 job that paid the bills, put food on the table, and kept the lights on. Meanwhile, David drifted between jobs, sometimes going weeks or even months without work. He'd claim he was figuring things out or waiting on the right opportunity, but nothing ever seemed to change. On top of her full-time job, Emily took care of everything at home. She walked the dogs, including the one they had recently adopted. She cooked every meal, cleaned every dish, did the laundry, and even helped raise his teenage boys as if they were her own. She showed up in every way that mattered. But when she needed something, time alone, support, even just a kind word, David rarely showed up for her. He expected her to be available all the time. If she tried to make plans with friends or family, he'd guilt her into canceling. If she expressed her needs, he'd either get defensive or ignore her entirely. Slowly, she stopped trying. Her social life vanished. Her world shrunk to fit inside David's, and she didn't even realize how lonely she'd become. Emily had given everything to the relationship, her time, her energy, her identity, and in return, she got crumbs. Emily had always dreamed of becoming a wife and a mother. She pictured a home filled with love, partnership, and shared responsibilities, not one where she felt like a live-in maid or invisible roommate. But no matter how long she waited, how many times she hinted or directly spoke about wanting more, a ring, real plans for the future, David brushed it off with vague promises. Someday never came. As she neared her mid-30s, a sense of urgency began to gnaw at her. Time was slipping through her fingers, and she couldn't help but wonder if she'd wake up one day in her 40s, filled with regret. The life she wanted and the one she was living no longer lined up, and she finally accepted that nothing would change unless she changed it. That's when an opportunity came up. Her sister was moving out of her apartment, and the lease was up for grabs. It felt like a sign, a possible escape route from the cycle she'd been trapped in. Emily didn't want to hurt David, but she couldn't stay silent anymore. She decided she would quietly move her things out while he was at work. No confrontation, no fight, just a clean break. She poured her heart into a letter, writing down everything she was too afraid to say out loud. She didn't want to break up. She still loved him, but she needed space, needed him to finally take her seriously. The hope was that distance might wake him up, that this bold move might shake something inside him. She wasn't running away. She was trying to save whatever love they had left. The morning Emily had planned to leave, she sat on the edge of the bed, paralyzed by a swirl of fear, guilt, and hope. She had everything packed, the essentials tucked neatly in her car, and the letter, full of raw truth, folded carefully in her purse. But something in her gut told her to pause. After reading through dozens of comments and messages from strangers online, people who had faced similar crossroads, she began to doubt whether leaving without a word was the right thing to do. What if this time David really listened? What if this moment could be the turning point they never had? She wasn't just walking away from a boyfriend. She was walking away from years of shared life, from the kids, from the dogs, from every memory they'd built. So she changed course. Instead of leaving, she stayed. She cleaned the house top to bottom, maybe out of habit, maybe out of nerves. She cooked dinner, showered, and got dressed like it was any normal day. But it wasn't. This time, she was preparing for war. Not with fists, but with truth. She sat on the couch, her thoughts organized and rehearsed through the letter she wrote, trying to stay calm. Her bags were still packed, just in case. And then she waited, heart pounding, for David to come home, not knowing that the next few hours would change everything. When David walked through the door that night, Emily tried to keep her voice steady, her heart racing behind calm eyes. She asked him to sit on the couch. Something about her tone must have tipped him off, because he immediately grew tense. "Just get to the point," he snapped. Emily reached for the letter she had written. Not to attack, not to blame, but to explain. She read aloud with trembling hands, each word soaked in love, fear, and desperation. She told him she wasn't abandoning him. She just needed space, needed things to finally change. She said she still wanted to fight for them, but not like this. Then she got to the line, "I've decided to move out." And that was it. David's face twisted in rage. He snatched the letter from her hands, tore it into shreds without even finishing it, and threw them in her face. In the same moment, he spit at her, a cruel, humiliating act that stunned her into silence. Before she could move, speak, or react, he grabbed her by the hair and slammed her into the floor. What followed was hours of hell. He punched, kicked, dragged her, screamed at her face. Emily tried to protect herself, but her strength gave out quickly. She cried out, hoping, praying, that a neighbor would hear something, that someone would come. But no one did. Her dogs barked frantically, circling around her, sensing danger. The youngest one even tried to bite David to protect her, but that only made him angrier. In a moment of instinct, Emily used her own body to shield her pup from a kick. She could feel herself breaking, physically and emotionally, but still clung to that last thread of protection for her dog, if not herself. When it was finally over, it was close to midnight. She was lying in a pool of her own blood and tears, her face swollen, her body throbbing with pain. David had locked himself in the bedroom, crying, begging through the door for her forgiveness, a twisted echo of the abuse cycle that had trapped her for years. Emily couldn't cry anymore. She just sat there, motionless, her soul detached from her body, as if watching someone else's nightmare. But this time, something inside her snapped. The house was silent now. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and David had finally passed out behind the locked bedroom door, his cries for forgiveness muffled by exhaustion and guilt, or maybe just his own shame. Emily lay still for a long time, barely breathing. Every inch of her body ached, her skin raw with bruises and cuts. Her face felt swollen beyond recognition, but she no longer felt pain, only a hollow numbness. That numbness is what saved her. She moved carefully, slowly, afraid to wake him. Her 2 dogs stayed close, following her like shadows, sensing the shift in energy. She grabbed her keys and the emergency bag she had packed earlier, the one she never thought she'd truly use. Without shoes on, she tiptoed through the house like a ghost, her heart pounding with fear that any sound might trigger another attack. But David stayed locked in the room, and then she was gone. She drove in the dead of night, every passing streetlight casting flickers across her bruised face. Her sister's apartment was 40 minutes away, and thankfully, she knew it would be empty. Her sister was staying with her boyfriend that night. It was the one stroke of luck Emily clung to. When she arrived, she let herself in, locked the door behind her, and collapsed onto the floor with her dogs. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't cry. She just existed, curled up in the dark, too broken to do anything else. The next 2 weeks were a blur. She didn't go to work. She didn't answer calls. She didn't explain anything to anyone. She hid from the world, trying to heal physically, but the emotional damage was harder to ignore. She looked at her bruises in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Not just the injuries, but the emptiness in her eyes. She knew she needed help. Medical, legal, emotional. But shame kept her silent. She told herself she was just resting, just waiting to feel better. But deep down, she was terrified. not just of David, but of what people would say when they found out what she had allowed to happen. Even though she was the victim, she felt like the one who had failed. It took Emily nearly 2 weeks to even consider telling someone what had happened. Not her family, not her friends, no one. The silence had been her protection and her prison. But something inside her shifted. Rage started to break through the numbness. Rage at David, rage at herself, rage at the fact that she had survived something so horrific and no one had ever warned her. And that's when she thought of Vanessa, David's ex-wife. Their relationship had always been strained. In the beginning, Vanessa had been hostile, calling Emily names behind her back and painting her as some young gold digger who swooped in on David for money. What Vanessa didn't realize was that Emily had always supported herself. She paid her share of the bills, took care of the kids when David didn't, and never once asked for anything she didn't earn. Still, the tension remained until recent years when they found some fragile truce. So Emily called her, not to start drama, not to pick a fight, but to ask one simple, devastating question. Did he ever do this to you? There was a pause on the other end of the line. And then Vanessa sighed and said, I was waiting for this call. That one sentence shattered Emily. Vanessa confessed everything. Yes, David had abused her too for years. He hit her, screamed at her, and worst of all, he didn't even try to hide it from the kids. He had thrown objects, punched holes in walls, and beaten her while their sons watched, too young to understand but old enough to remember. She'd filed multiple restraining orders during their 10-year marriage, but David never respected them. He got arrested several times, but was never convicted. Why? Because Vanessa dropped the charges. Every time. She was undocumented back then, and she feared that without him, she'd lose her chance to become a citizen, or worse, her kids. Eventually, she applied for her green card under the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, a program for abused spouses of U.S. citizens. That's how she finally escaped, legally and physically. But emotionally, she admitted she still carried the scars. Emily sat there, shaking, her phone in one hand and photos of her own blackened eyes and bruised body in the other. The pieces fell into place, the controlling behavior, the emotional outbursts, the manipulation. It wasn't just a one-time loss of control. It was a pattern, and the worst part? No one warned her. Vanessa said she kept her silence because she didn't think Emily would listen. She saw Emily as naive, in love, determined to believe David had changed. Maybe she had been, but now she saw clearly. Emily didn't feel scared anymore. She felt furious. The moment Emily ended the call with Vanessa, something inside her cracked wide open. But it wasn't fear anymore, it was pure, burning rage. She stared at the photos of her battered face, the bald spot where her hair had been torn out, the bruises lining her ribs, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel numb. She felt alive with anger, betrayed not just by David, but by everyone who had known the truth and stayed silent. How could they let her walk into this life without warning? But then it hit her like a punch in the chest. She wasn't the first, and if she stayed quiet, she probably wouldn't be the last. David had done this before. He had broken another woman, in front of their children, and never faced real consequences. And now, he had done it again. He didn't just need to be left behind. He needed to be stopped. Emily realized she had been carrying a twisted kind of guilt, that going to the police would mean taking a father away from his kids. But now she saw it differently. Protecting them meant stopping him. What if they became his next victims? What if history repeated itself? Only this time, there was no one left to intervene. She thought about all the nights she made dinner for those boys, helped them with homework, tucked them in when David couldn't be bothered to show up. She had cared for them like they were her own. She still did. That was the moment Emily chose responsibility over silence. She didn't care about the fallout anymore. She didn't care if David cried or begged or blamed her. She was done playing the peacekeeper. She was going to the police with her photos, her statement, and the truth. No more hiding. No more second chances. If nobody had protected her, she'd damn well protect someone else. Emily walked into the police station with trembling hands but steady purpose. The bruises were fading, but the memories were still fresh, burned into her skin, her thoughts, her nightmares. She carried a folder packed with photos, screenshots, and written timelines. It wasn't just evidence. It was her truth, something she had been hiding from the world and from herself. As she sat across from the officer, explaining everything that had happened, the shame she'd been drowning in began to loosen its grip. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was strength to finally say it out loud. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Not his tears, not his apologies, not the times he'd sworn it would never happen again. Those used to be her excuses. Not anymore. She stopped protecting him. For years, she had minimized the red flags. The verbal outbursts, the controlling behavior, the guilt trips, the small outbursts of anger that escalated slowly over time. She had convinced herself he was damaged, not dangerous. Now, she saw him clearly for what he was, a repeat abuser. Someone who hurt the women who loved him the most and blamed them for it afterward. She also began therapy. Talking to someone helped her untangle the mental knots. The guilt, the fear, the impulse to take care of the man who nearly killed her. She started seeing the pattern for what it was, a cycle of manipulation and violence, dressed up as love. And most importantly, she started emotionally detaching from the story he had written for her. No more feeling sorry for him. No more worrying about his reputation. No more silence. Her focus was now on justice. Not revenge, but protection. Protection for herself, for his kids, and for any woman who might come after her. She knew reporting him wouldn't erase what happened, but it could stop him from doing it again. Emily wasn't hiding anymore. She had survived, and now she was fighting back, not just for herself, but for every version of herself that had been silenced along the way. In the quiet that followed the chaos, Emily finally had space to breathe and to reflect. She thought about all the years she spent bending herself to fit into someone else's life. How she tiptoed around David's moods. How she tried so hard to earn the approval of his family. Even Vanessa, his ex-wife, who once called her a gold digger and wanted nothing to do with her. Emily had sent gifts for birthdays and holidays, played peacemaker, made sure the kids always felt safe and loved, all to prove she was good enough. But no matter what she gave, it was never enough to be truly seen, let alone respected. Now, with distance, she could finally see it clearly. She had lost herself in the process of being good enough for everyone else. And yet, it wasn't her family or friends who helped her find her way back. It was strangers. People online who read her words, who didn't know her personally but saw her pain, believed her, and reminded her that she wasn't alone, that she wasn't crazy, that what she experienced was real, and it was abuse. In those comments, she found validation. In those stories shared by others, she found strength. Piece by piece, she started rebuilding her identity, not as someone's girlfriend, not as a caretaker, but as Emily, the survivor, the woman who got out. She knew the road ahead would be long. Healing wasn't a switch she could flip. Some days she still woke up with panic in her chest, and some nights, the bruises still ached like ghosts. But she was showing up for herself this time. With therapy underway, legal steps in motion, and a community rooting for her recovery, Emily made a vow. She would never shrink herself again. The version of herself who once stayed silent, out of fear, out of love, out of guilt, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had found her voice, and she was going to use it. To heal, to protect, to move forward.